Speaking of positively odd, here's some clothing, including me wearing a skirt. Not many people have seen that picture or will have their hands on that picture. The only time I've been outside of America and Europe, I took one trip a few years ago to Myanmar. Traditional clothing for many of the guys still is, this skirt, what they call the longji. And I sent that picture of me in it to the guys back there, and we had a good laugh because, they have worn those, and they told me, what are the colors for officially wearing, a men's skirt, and what colors for, when you're around home. But either way, in hot weather, it's nice and cool, to wear a skirt. So that's me in a skirt. Like I said, you might not ever see me, live wearing my skirt. But in any case, one of the things I noticed in those weeks in Myanmar, what would often happen, though, is when people were working or playing, they would take that skirt and, hold it up, tie it up in some way so that they could play, whether they're working or you can hardly see there's like a football there, and so the guys are playing football, and so that their feet can be free to lift them high, they would, around their hips, their waists, they would tie up the skirt there, okay? So that's normal. You don't see that in the streets of Riga too much, but when I was there then, that was very, very normal. But you got that image of, if you're wearing a skirt or a robe, in order to be free to do something and not hindered by it, then you would tie it up so that your legs and feet would be free. And that's exactly the image that Peter uses in the passage that we're looking at today in 1 Peter chapter 1, starting with verse 13. And lots of translations do it different ways. So it starts off, therefore, prepare your minds for action. But what Peter literally says is, tie up the skirts of your mind. So we know it's a metaphor, it's of your mind, but he uses the words for tying up like your robe so that you are free and not distracted, and your body is prepared for whatever it is you're going to do. Okay, so that's the image Peter uses there, and it's an image that's used in several other places in the Bible. So he says, prepare your minds for action, or, tie up whatever is distracting you in your mind, get it out of the way so that your mind is prepared for action, and be sober or serious in spirit. Then fix your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts, which were yours in your ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves and also in all your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy, because I am holy. If you address his Father, the one who impartially judges to each one's... just a second. We're having many little issues to fix today. There we go. That's not perfect, but who judges, impartially judges according to each one's work. Conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your stay on earth, knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers. That's one of the reasons why we understand that this audience are former Gentiles, because those would not be words that would normally be used for Jewish people, a feudal way of life. That would be how people would have described the Gentiles' life. So these are former Gentiles who are now Christians. They've been redeemed from that feudal way of life, but with the precious blood as of a lamb, unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. For he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has appeared in these last times for your sake, for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. If you're reading 1 Peter, and I've tried to encourage you to try to read 1 Peter regularly, and I encourage you not only to kind of speed read it, because you can read the whole book in 15, 20 minutes, but also sometimes just slow down, maybe take a piece at a time, because you can actually follow the argument of 1 Peter fairly easily. And this text is structured in a very clear way, but the first and central command, actually in the entire book, is when Peter says, set your hope. That's verse 13. In the first 12 verses, Peter does not actually give any kind of command. In lots of translations, when you start to read verse 13, it sounds like a list of commands. Do this, prepare your minds for action and be sober and set your hope. But grammatically in Greek, actually the first command is this: set your hope. And we know that's a central idea because at the end of this text, Peter says again, your faith and hope are in God. And even at the beginning of the book, in verse 3, Peter talks about the word hope. And so the word hope is one of the important words that it ties this entire book together. And here, the first command that we are given in the book of 1 Peter is about our hope. And the previous things that Peter says actually basically support that. So the way that we set our hope is first by preparing our minds for action. Okay, so if we're going to hope well, we need to do something with our minds. Okay, hope is not primarily a feeling that we have, but it's something that we do with our minds, and then we give our full attention to something. It's another way to translate what Peter writes in Greek. Give your full attention to it. If someone is drunk, they can hardly focus on anything. Okay, so being sober, again, it's not meaning literally don't be drunk. I mean, don't be drunk. Okay, but that's not Peter's point. He's talking about our focus, our ability to focus and to be in control of ourselves so that we can hope. And then Peter kind of unpacks, how to live that out in your context. So, for instance, he says, don't conform to the evil desires, the natural desires that you had before you knew Jesus. Peter says, don't keep living that way. Live a different way. And then he says, be holy. And we'll come back to that word. Be holy, for it is written, God says, you should be holy because I am holy. You belong to me because I am holy. You show that you are my people by being holy or different or set apart in some way similar to the way I am different, set apart. And then live as a resident alien in reverence for God. So that's how they are to live in their context. And it's going to get more and more practical as we're working our way through 1 Peter. It's going to get more and more detailed and more practical. But for now, Peter is talking about how our thinking needs to be different in light of who we are. Okay. So that's kind of what we're supposed to do. But then Peter builds a foundation for that. The ground or the foundation of this hope is this perfect sacrifice of Jesus. Okay, because of what Jesus has done and what we learn through who Jesus is and what he has done, therefore we set this hope. So he talks about this perfect sacrifice of Jesus, and he says that it's imperishable and precious. We're going to come back to especially focus on those words, but that's another concept or words that Peter uses all through 1 Peter. He talks about what is precious, and he talks about what is permanent or imperishable, and he contrasts that to what is impermanent or perishable. And here he's simply saying we have been redeemed by something that is permanent, imperishable. Everything else around you might change, but you have a foundation that doesn't change. And then another part of the ground for our hope is that Jesus arrived according to God's plan. And I talk about this all the time, and again, we're going to come back and look at that again. But Part of our hope for the future is the fact that everything that has happened in the past has unfolded according to God's plan, even the death of Jesus. When sin did its worst, when it seemed like evil had absolute victory and mastery, when evil did the worst that it could possibly do in killing the Son of God, as a matter of fact, in that very act, evil lost. Evil's greatest victory was a loss for evil. And that's why we can have hope. Okay, if God has already defeated, brought victory out of the worst evil possible, then there's nothing else that we could possibly face, nothing else could possibly come down the road that could defeat God's plan. And then we have this hope because of the resurrection of Jesus. So in his death, he paid the penalty for sin and exposed sin was, and in his resurrection, now he is alive. Death could not defeat him, and consequently, that becomes the foundation or the ground of this hope that we have. But this is the structure of that passage. Okay, and if you just stop to think about it, kind of list it out and think about the relationship of these ideas, it actually makes a good bit of sense. It's not a great mystery here. The text that we're going to look at in 2 weeks in more depth, but it has the same kind of structure where Peter talks about what we're supposed to do and then a foundation for that. So here he says, since you have, in obedience to the truth, purified your souls for sincere love of the brothers, fervently love one another from the heart. Okay, that's what we're supposed to do, and then the foundation or ground of that is this: because you've been born again, not of seed which is perishable, but imperishable. That is, through the living and enduring Word of God. For all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers, the flower falls off, but the word of the Lord endures forever, and that's the word that was preached to you. Other words come and go, but the word that was preached to you, the message that you have heard and accepted, that's an eternal message. And so we can risk our life on that message because it's the eternal message. But for today, the key word is going to be hope. And what's hard about what Peter says there, when he makes it a command and he says, set your hope on the grace that's going to be brought to you. And our problem with that, at least my problem with that, is often words like hope, we think of it as a kind of feeling that we might have. You know, I hope something would happen. Or we might think, I don't feel hope that it's going to turn out okay. And so we think of hope as a feeling, and if it's a feeling, you know, you either have it or you don't have it. And you might think, but I don't feel hopeful about the future. I actually feel quite discouraged about the future. But Peter makes it a command, so apparently there's something that we can do, something that we ought to do when it comes to hope. That it's not just feelings that we might not be able to control, but our hope comes from some other place than our emotions. I mean, this is why, you know, the advice, follow your heart or follow your feelings, is usually bad advice. Okay? Most of the time it's bad advice. Okay? Because our feelings are up and down and changed by the weather. You know, again, if you're here in Latvia for the first time, you know, long about December and January, you might honestly be feeling a little more depressed and down. And it happens even to people who've lived there all their life, and it's the weather. Okay? I mean, I'm not trying to, you know, minimize it. I'm just saying a lot of it is actually the weather. There's all sorts of things that affect our emotions and our feelings. And so the core of hope, though, needs to be somewhere else other than our feelings, were our emotions. And this is why Peter mainly uses these mind words when he's talking about hope. And he says, prepare your minds, do something with your mind. Discipline your mind to think differently. And then he talks about being sober-minded. And again, there it's not, it doesn't mean literally don't be drunk, although once again, that's awfully good advice. And when he says be sober-minded or serious-minded, it doesn't mean, never have fun. Okay, I mean, if you read much history, there's all sorts of situations people have been in, even facing death, that they could still joke around. So it's not a matter of not having fun or not making jokes. That's not what exactly it means to be sober-minded or serious, but it's the idea of having a clear mind. Your mind not fuddled with other things. There's not a lot of other things going around in your mind so that you can't focus. Be clear-minded so that you can make good judgments. And the point is we can discipline our mind to do that. I remember a number of years ago I was visiting my sister and her husband, and I lived about 5 hours away, and I'd driven down there and was visiting them, and then I was going to drive back to home. And when I was going to leave, my brother-in-law was, "Oh, Mark, can I ask you a favor?" And I kind of knew what the favor was going to be. There was someone else who needed a ride, back to the home area where I was. Okay, and those who know me know I'm actually quite an introvert. When I'm up here, I do a lot of talking. I don't necessarily talk all the time everywhere else. So I'm thinking, oh man, it's going to be this 5-hour trip, and it's either going to be, awkward conversation or awkward silence, and I don't really want to do that. I want to drive and be in my own world. So I knew what he was going to ask me, so I just said, just don't ask me yet. Okay? And because I literally just wanted to go away, and I needed to have my quiet time in the Bible. I needed to do something with I knew what the right thing was needed to be. Okay? I knew, of course, I need to say yes. I need to help out. Of course I do. But I needed to do something with my mind so I was ready to do it. And I could do it willingly. So I was like, let me go prepare my mind for action. And so I did that. I just needed that. Take a deep breath. Sometimes that's a good idea. Just literally take a deep breath. For me, just open the Bible, look at the Word, get my mind fixed on what is most important, and then I could go back and say, okay, Roger, what is it that you want me to do? Of course, I knew what it is, and I said yes. But we do this in all the other areas of our life. We prepare ourselves for it. I mean, Dulon talked about, having to talk about a job and so forth. Many of you have had a job interview. I hope when you had that interview for work, you prepared yourself. Hopefully. You probably even thought, what am I going to wear? Maybe even the night before you thought, what should I wear for the job interview? And should I iron my shirt? And you prepared, you thought, what questions would they ask? And you prepared answers. You thought about, what should I look like should I have a big smile, like an American, yay, or just look frown, or just, I imagine a lot of you thought about that. You prepared for that job interview. We do it all the time. You go ask a girl out. Of course, I realize that varies from culture to culture. You probably prepared yourself. Maybe there's a few of you guys that are just hyper bold and you're like, what's his face from Friends? How are you doing? Most of us are not like that. Okay, and so it's like I would get sick to my stomach, literally. So you prepare yourself What are you going to say and how are you going to say it? What if she says no? What if she says maybe? We do that all the time in lots of other areas of our life. We can do that in our walk with Jesus and life in the world. You prepare your mind even for hope. You do something with your mind so that you're focused and clear, and you can think a certain way about your life so that then you can make better decisions about your life. This idea is actually very important in 1 Peter because 2 other times he says the same thing. In chapter 4, verse 7, he says, the end of all things is near. Okay, we're going to get back to that text because that's really weird. That was 2,000 years ago. And Peter said, the end of all things is near. What's up with that? But then he says, therefore be clear-minded and self-controlled so that you can pray. And then in chapter 5, in verse 8, he says, be self-controlled and alert. And here he says, because your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. So what we do with our minds is important. And if we're going to be different so that we can make a difference in the world, we're going to have to do something with our thinking. And so this is kind of, as we've talked about, the flow of 1 Peter. You are different, so be different. Be holy as I am holy, he wrote, so that you can make a difference in the world. Okay, and that's only going to happen as we learn to think differently about our life and about our circumstances, and we fix our mind more on certain things and less on certain other things. So that's the central command. Fix your hope on the grace that is to be brought to you. There's a better future in your mind or in line for you, so you can live a certain way now. You can make different decisions now because you know there's this great future in store for you. Then Peter says what I just quoted, and be holy in all that you do, in all your behavior, be holy. And he quotes from the Old Testament where it says, God says, be holy because I am holy. That's another word that it's going to be important for us to sort out. In fact, it's going to come up again in a few weeks. I think when Nenad is preaching, he's going to come back to this word holy and what it means to be holy. The core idea of being holy is to be different, especially to be set apart. So God is holy in the sense that he is different. He's different from anything in the created world. He's holy, he's different, he's special. God is holy in that sense. And we are holy, or even objects can be holy as they are set apart to God and what he is doing. Now, often in maybe a lot of other religions, when we think about the word holy or we think about worshiping God, we think about maybe ceremonial rituals that we do. And so we're going to go do some holy thing. Going back to when I was in Myanmar, in Yangon, the capital city, there's this amazing Shwedagon pagoda. It's just, everyone needs to visit there. But in that, Buddhist complex, there's lots of other religious acts being done. Holy water being poured here and people doing sorts of things. And we might think of the word holy as, something that you do in a temple. You do these holy rituals because there's this holy God that you might be worshiping there. But in the Bible, and especially in 1 Peter, holy is very, very down to earth. It's very earthy. It's all about how we live here. So right now, how you are sitting, can or might not be holy. When the service is over and you go out and you drink some more coffee, or maybe don't drink the coffee, it might not be good. Drink some more tea. There is more food and you're talking to people. There can be a holy way in which you talk to people and a not so holy way in which you might talk to people. But it's very down to earth Okay? We are holy, so we need to be different. We are holy, so we need to be different in how we live, not necessarily by different kinds of religious acts, but by different kinds of conversations, by different priorities that we live by reacting differently to the things that come our way. Not reacting like other people might react, but a different way, a holy way, a way that shows that we are different, a way that shows that we are actually worshiping a God who is different. Which brings us back to hope. Because one of the ways in which we can be different than most people in the world is by, number one, having a hope and having a different hope. Because a lot of people live in the world without a lot of hope. A lot of people live in the world with a lot of discouragement about the way the world is going, or their country is going, or the way their relationships are going, and live in despair, perhaps. If you're on public transportation, or just walking around, I've often said, instead of looking at your device or whatever, just sit and observe people. And maybe as you see people, look at their faces. And ask yourself, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? Are they living in despair? Because I imagine you can sometimes see it on people's faces, I think. People who live under a great weight of their life. You can sometimes see it in their hands. Someone who's worked all their life. They've not necessarily had an easy life. They haven't lived with a lot of hope. And see that on people's faces and read it in their bodies. A lot of people don't live with a great deal of hope in the world. Because after all, there's not necessarily a lot to hope in the world out there, But this is how we can be different. This is how we can be holy, by having a different hope. And even when negative things come, we maintain our hope. It's how we're different. That's how we can live differently, and that's how we can make a difference. And so later on, Peter is going to talk about when people ask you why you have that hope. Why Dulon can say, it's fine. He can lose his job and say, it's fine, it's okay. That guy should say, what's up with you, Dulon? How can you react that way? What hope do you have in your heart that you can just say it's fine when you lose your job? It's how we're different. This is how we make a difference, through our hope. One of the commentaries had this line: we need to hope wholly or completely and become holy. And this is all kind of one act. It all fits together, and in 1 Peter especially, it's about hope, about living with hope in the midst of a world that doesn't provide that hope. And so Peter gives this ground for the hope that we have. We conduct ourselves as strangers here. This time on earth, we live as if we're strangers, as if we're resident aliens. But we can do that because there's something that is worthy of our hope. It's the blood of Jesus, and it's imperishable. We can have hope because of the value of Jesus. He is worthy of hope. He's got that value. We can hope in Jesus. And we can have hope because of the value of God's intention. And the way Peter puts it here is, he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has appeared in these last times for your sake. That is, before Jesus came to earth, God the Father already knew. He knew beforehand that his Son was going to appear on earth. He knew beforehand because it was part of a plan. there was a plan. There's a plan from beginning. There's a plan. And it's all worked out. I mean, even the death of Jesus was according to a plan. I mean, that's why all through the New Testament, it's one of those hard passages, because certainly the people who did it were guilty of crucifying the Son of God, but it's very clear that in all of that, God was never out of control. The world was never out of the control of God's hands, even when His Son was being crucified. It was all working out according to plan. It has for thousands of years, and that's why we can hope in the future. If God had a plan and it worked out, then that's reason for confidence that whatever God has said He's going to do in the future, He's going to do. So that's the foundation or ground of our hope. And the practical step is in verse 17. If you address His Father, the one who impartially judges according to each one's work, conduct your lives in fear during the time of your stay on earth. Okay, it's a similar idea that Peter communicated in different words about being a stranger or an alien, a resident alien. Again, like most of you are, most of us even are in Latvia, we are here now for a stay. Some of us, it's a long stay. I've been here a long time. I hope to be here a long time in the future, because I hope not to die soon. My intention, in spite of the fact that my wife laughs at me when I say this, is when I retire, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to die here and be buried in Latvia. I hope that's a long ways off. So I'm here a long time, but at the same time, I'm still a resident alien. Okay? And that helps me to not demand things that I just know it's not, I shouldn't expect that, because I'm a stranger here and I understand that. Okay? I'm not going to understand everything. That's okay. People won't necessarily fully accept me here. I mean, generally I'm thankful that, I'm quite well accepted in Latvia, but there's still, you're still a little bit different and odd and weird. I just accept it and it's okay. I can live with it because I just understand I'm a resident alien. But we all are, and that's Peter's point. When you go back home, you're still a resident alien. And if you accept that about that status, you'll actually find life much easier. So we're resident aliens. We live here, but we don't quite belong here. We belong someplace else, even though for now we are planted in this place. Now, for Peter's original audience, they're part of the Roman Empire, and now the Roman Empire is kind of pressing in on them. And so, as we've seen, one of the reasons for 1 Peter is that persecution is heating up. Not so much official Roman persecution, but just in their own societies and their own cities, there's kind of this growing pressure on Christians because they are Christians, because they are odd. They're not worshiping all the other gods, including the Roman gods. And you can worship whatever other gods you want to worship, but you also have to worship Rome and the emperor. And Christians aren't doing that. So that's what these Christians are facing. The power of the Roman Empire that can crush them. And for some of them, will kill them. The Roman Empire will probably kill some of them, like it will kill Peter. That's what the Roman Empire can do. And so the wise thing would be to set their hope in the Roman Empire. That would make perfect sense. Okay, because that's going to by their time, it's been going on for a long time. And it sure seems like that Roman Empire is just going to go on, year after year and century after century, and just getting bigger and bigger and more powerful and more glorious. They should put their hope in the Roman Empire, except that would have been completely and utterly foolish, okay, because the Roman Empire is gone. It wasn't permanent. And so now we have this, and of course the Romans built things pretty well, so they made roads that are generally better than the roads that we build now. So you can still find Roman roads, but the truth is, it's all gone. Not the buildings, but the whole system. It's all gone. All the glory is gone. It's cool buildings, but they're empty of glory. In the Colosseum when I was there, all there were thousands and thousands of people. There was not much glory in the Colosseum. It was kind of cool to see, but it was also kind of a letdown. Okay, because it was just perishable. So this is why Peter says, don't put your hope on perishable things, but imperishable things. Yeah, and for the original audience, don't set your hope on the Roman Empire. There's no hope there. It might outlast you, but it's going to be gone. People gave their lives for the Roman Empire, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. The Roman Empire is gone. It's nothing. It has no power. It has no glory. Why wouldn't we want to give our lives for something that's permanent, that's forever? What a thing to give our lives for. That's what Peter is talking about. And so practically for us, as we think about hope, what we need to do is monitor our thinking, think about our thinking, and ask ourselves, what am I putting my hope in? And is this going to satisfy? Is this actually going to make me happy? And to learn to not set our hope on things that ultimately are going to disappoint. Okay? I'm just listening to Timothy's sermon there. So, material things are not worth putting your hope in because they're not going to last. Your telephone isn't going to last. I think mine is, or it's not in my pocket now. I think mine is starting to die. Cars, just don't put your hope in a car. It's a good tool, take care of it, okay? But don't put your hope for happiness in that. Don't hold on to it as if this, finally now, I've solved this problem and I have this car, or I have this house, or I have this job, or I have this education. Don't put your hope in that. Get your education. Try to pursue a career. Okay, but don't put your hope in all of it working out. I'm going to go to RSU, and then I'm going to become a doctor, and then I'm going to go here, and I'm going to get this job, and I'm going to make all this money. Have a plan, but don't put your hope in that. Don't put your hope in it, because you can't make that happen, and it doesn't always happen that way for everyone. Don't put your hope in anything that is perishable. So in any kind of decision that we make, even in interactions with people, we need to ask ourselves, what is permanent here and what is not permanent? What matters and what doesn't really matter? So next week, we can't meet in this room, okay? Even though we have a contract that sort of says we did, and they maybe should have told us ahead of time that this room wasn't going to be available. So that's a hassle, okay? I honestly wish we could just have a service here next week. It's a hassle. But in any case, it's just a very temporary thing. Okay, what's more permanent than having one service in this building is our relationship with people here. Okay, the people that disappointed us, maybe, are actually permanent. And what matters is our relationship with them. Okay? And so we choose to not make a big stink about this room. We choose not to get angry, not to shake our finger, not to say, oh, we should do this or you should. We choose not to because we want that relationship to become something that is permanent. That's a value. This room and just being able to meet Sunday by Sunday, it's a nice thing, but it's not got eternal value because we can meet somewhere else. We can. Okay, you see what I'm saying? I'm talking about a thought process that we go through as we make decisions. We just constantly ask ourselves, what is permanent here? What is temporary? What is perishable? What is imperishable? What has eternal value? What am I hoping in? What am I expecting in? Do I have wrong expectations for whatever it might be? That ideal life, in America, a White House and this picket fence and, 2.8 kids or whatever that traditional ideal is and a puppy dog and, your kids are going to bring you happiness. Not for a long time. Not for a long time. Your dog might bring you happiness, okay? But kids are going to produce a lot of work. And even marriage will. Okay? Just like, as Aaron said, there's no perfect church. There's no perfect marriage. If you're setting your hope on that relationship, if he will just like me, if she will just like me, my life is going to just be tons better. It might be better. Okay? I mean, it's a good thing. Marriage is a good thing. Okay? I'm married and I'm happily married. I'm glad I got married. Okay? You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but if I put all my hope in that relationship, then I'm going to spend some time without hope. Because none of that is 24/7 perfect. So we need to think differently. Well, Peter says, your faith and hope are in God. Faith is not just a belief that we have, a mental thing, and hope is not just an emotional thing. But maybe some good words to help us understand that is that our allegiance and our confidence is in God. Our allegiance, that's what faith ultimately is. We give our allegiance to Jesus. We trust him enough to follow him with our life. That's faith. That's trust. It's not just believing that with our mind, but our allegiance, our heart is bent toward him so that we are willing to follow him. And we have confidence. We live with confidence. We might not feel with confidence, but we could ask ourselves, if I really believed that God had this beautiful end for me, then what would I do? Whatever comes into your mind, then do that. As someone said, faith is doing what you would do if you did have faith. Okay, if you want to sort that out some. Faith is doing what you would do if you did have faith. If you really had this strong feeling of faith, what would you do? Do it, and that's faith, even if you don't have that feeling. In Peter's own life, there's an incident recorded in Luke chapter 5 where they were fishing all night. Of course, Peter was a professional fisherman. And Jesus was on the seashore. And then Jesus is in the boat, and Jesus is giving orders to Peter about fishing. Of course, Jesus was not a professional fisherman. He grew up as a carpenter. Peter, his boat, his profession, he's the master. Jesus, not so much when it comes to fishing. So I imagine when Jesus said, cast your net on the other side. In fact, what Peter did say is, Lord, we've been fishing all night. As if to say, you don't really know what you're talking about. We've already tried and nothing is, the fish are just not jumping in the net now. Okay, so forget it. So that's Peter's first response. You don't know what you're talking about. But then Peter says, nevertheless, since you say so, okay, we'll do it. I doubt Peter had any feelings of hope. He was probably casting the net and thinking, this is really stupid. No, seriously, he was probably thinking, this is really stupid, and in a moment, Jesus is going to look stupid. Okay? Until the net was full of fish. See, but Peter didn't act on his feelings, he acted on the word of Jesus. With confidence in Jesus, not in the fish, maybe, but just enough confidence in Jesus to do what Jesus said, and his hope was fulfilled. And because his hope wasn't about his feelings of hope, how much hope, what matters about hope is what we hope in. Hope in the right thing. That's why Peter can command, set your hope. Set your hope on the right thing. Fix your mind. Think about the right thing. Keep focused. Get rid of anything that's distracting you. Hike up the skirts of your mind so that you're not distracted by other things, so that your mind is free to focus on Jesus and to live in hope based on what you already know about him. Let's pray.